Welcome to Accommodate This. In today's video, I discuss the work of Simon Baron-Cohen, who is considered one of the foremost authorities on autism in the UK. He's published hundreds of papers and books about autism over his 40-plus years of autistic research. The sheer enormity of his portfolio has saturated libraries around the world, which has had a tremendous impact on the world's understanding of autism. And that's why we're here. So let's get into the topic for this video. Sir Simon Baron-Cohen. Sir Simon Philip Baron-Cohen is a British clinical psychologist and professor of developmental psychopathology at Cambridge, the founder and director of the university's Autism Research Center, and a fellow of Trinity College. Cohen has been performing autistic research for over 40 years. The first half of his research was focused on disability and the deficits defining autistic stereotypes. And then during that time, he wrote several books based on a binary view of autistics, which has led to a lot of harm in the autistic community. His background indicates he's been greatly influenced by Christianity and has even infused Christian beliefs into his research. So, for example, his view of gender and gender roles has led him to publish arguments that were considered by others as neurosexism. When interviewed, he seemed to sincerely believe he was doing good, but his actions show he has failed to suppress his religious bias. I'm not saying that as my opinion. He literally published a book on the problem of evil. Now, I can't tell if he really believes in the dichotomy of good versus evil, or if he's simply using the terminology to sell more books. In either case, it doesn't seem scientifically honest to have that approach. Instead of trying to understand autistic points of view, he spent the majority of his career trying to fit autism into his theory of empathizing and systemizing. While he uses a very calculated approach to describe his observations, his conclusions tend to be very shallow and insensitive. Even to this day, he peddles the idea, which most serious scientists find overly simplistic and sexist. Perhaps it is just a marketing ploy. After all, it stands to reason that if he uses a risque term to describe something, it's more likely to sell more books. Saying we may have an extreme brain entices more people to read it than saying he simply recognized some interesting trends. He's peddled this empathizing, systemizing theory over and over again, despite several criticisms pointing out the problems with trying to associate behaviors, mental capacity, and gender. Gender really doesn't have anything to do with it. For example, this is a chart Cohen often uses to explain his theory of systemizing and empathizing. This shows people who are more empathetic on the upper left, while those who are more systematic are on the bottom right. Then he looks at the gender of each person and notices more females appear in the top left under empathizing, while more males appear in the bottom right with systemizing. And then he notices most of the non-autistic people are closer to the center, implying they have more of a balance between empathizing and systemizing. But autistics appear in the extreme bottom right corner. Therefore, he concludes autistics must have extremely male brains. The logical leap would be comical if it weren't so damaging. There are several obvious problems with this conclusion. For one, if autistic females are also in the bottom right corner, then that debunks his theory that women in general are more empathizing. Second, he's making general inferences based on a portion of the population. Third, his model does not consider non-binary and transgender people. or females that present with more male traits and males that present with more female traits. Fourth, he's assuming these behaviors are innate and not taught or nurtured based on societal beliefs about gender roles. And fifth, his conclusion assumes that all applicants interpreted the questions and answers consistently. So basically, this image is full of assumptions, and so are his conclusions. And I'm not the only one to have noticed this. Cohen's theories have been criticized as examples of neurosexism and his views as methodologically flawed. As years have passed and more has been learned, the idea that autism affects boys more than girls is fading. I get that he has a reputation to maintain, and it's difficult to admit mistakes. However, he's not only been wrong about his empathizing systemizing theories, he's responsible for formulating several faulty theories about autism. Here are a few. His mind blindness theory of mind theory, which claims autistics lack a theory of mind that makes them less capable of assessing the mental states of others. Now, he conducted tests to show autistics had difficulties reading minds in the eyes of others. Now, he's had some growth in recent years. He admits that the term blindness gives the wrong impression. Since the development of an understanding that there is a spectrum, his beliefs have shifted to understand there are different levels of understanding of what other people are thinking. Other researchers also argue that non-autistics also struggle to read the minds of autistics, indicating it's a two-way street and not just a deficit in autistics. This is a concept known as the double empathy problem. He also had a theory of empathizing systemizing, which I mentioned earlier. This theory claims that men tend to be more systemizing and women tend to be more empathizing, but autistics take the extremes of the systemizing traits and therefore have extreme male brains. He also claimed that this could be a result of higher testosterone levels during pregnancy, which was mostly based on the fact that autism was believed to be more prevalent in males in the 80s. He's had some growth here as well, because since then he's claimed gender difference is the wrong way to look at it, but he still peddles this idea every chance he gets. Then there's his theory of 0 degrees of empathy, which suggests autistics treat other people as objects. And despite the irony, he compared autistics to psychopaths, narcissists, and people with borderline personality disorder. He has had some growth where, since his writings, he's learned that it's more of a matter of struggling with cognitive empathy, which is recognizing and identifying emotions in others. But autistics do have normal levels of affective empathy, which is feeling emotions for others. He does claim that psychopaths and people with antisocial disorder were the opposite, where they had strong cognitive empathy and no affective empathy. He also wrote about the way abuse contributes to breaking down empathy, and his book was an exploration of different factors. His theory on pattern seekers suggests that humans are the only species capable of invention, and he expands upon his earlier theory of empathizing, systemizing, claiming autistics may be crucial to human advancement because of our ability to think outside the box. He emphasizes the benefits of allowing children to pursue their interests, which may be more systemizing in nature, but ultimately more beneficial for human advancement. This is his attempt to paint us in a positive light, but it still attempts to pigeonhole us into a particular mold. Then there's assortative mating theory, which claims people who rate higher on the systemizing end of the ES spectrum are more likely to marry each other and more likely to have autistic offspring due to relatively recent societal changes. The data from these studies was used to conclude that autistics are better at math. Yeah, really. He and his team at Cambridge also developed the Autism Spectrum Quotient, or the AQ test, in 2001, which is a test that's used to diagnose autism today by measuring the prevalence of autistic traits. But that's a fact that I still find somewhat troubling. Now, Cohen has published over 750 peer-reviewed papers and books to spread his theories around the world. Though originally written in English, some of his most popular books have been translated into Dutch, French, German, Japanese, Polish, Portuguese, Russian, Spanish, Swedish, and Turkish. His books on autism include Autism and Asperger Syndrome from 1991, a book that explains differences and similarities between the two diagnoses using real examples from autistic people in Simon's past. And Asperger's has since been absorbed into autism spectrum disorder, so it's kind of lost a little bit of meaning. Then there's Autism, the Facts from 1993, a book designed to address common questions about autism, structured like an FAQ. And of course, much of our scientific understanding of autism has changed since 1993. His book, Understanding Other Minds, is about autism and theory of mind, which has been challenged by the double empathy problem. Then there's Mind Blindness from 1995, based on a paper that he wrote in 1985. And in this book, Cohen claims that autistics lack a theory of mind, which makes them less capable of assessing the mental states of others. And again, this is challenged by the double empathy problem. His book, Teaching Children with Autism to Mind Read from 98, is a collaborative book with Simon as one of 3 co-authors designed to help teachers educate autistic children about theory of mind. But there are no attempts made to educate non-autistic children about autistic minds. His book, All About Emotions from the year 2000, it's a short book, co-authored by Cohen and 2 other clinical psychologists. It's intended to help people understand emotions and how they relate to social interactions. His book, The Essential Difference from 2003, explores the differences between male and female brains to prove his extreme male brain theory of autism. This is shown to be invalid. An Exact Mind, An Artist with Asperger Syndrome from 2004, is another short book about a particular autistic man with an artistic capability. Again, he co-authored this book with 2 others with a focus on explaining their theory of systemizing brains. Mind Reading Emotions Library from 2004. This is actually an interactive DVD covering 412 emotions, complete with video samples and explanations to assist people of all ages who are interested in learning how to better recognize emotions in others. It includes a game mode and a test mode to assist in learning these concepts. However, there is no mode for recognizing emotions in autistics. Prenatal Testosterone in Mind, also from 2004, another book about systemizing and empathizing. He claims that the results of his research could be related to higher testosterone levels during pregnancy, which was mostly based on the fact that autism was believed to be more prevalent in males in the 1980s. Now, he makes some logical leaps, for instance, taking trends of occupations and speculating the choice of occupation is based on differences in sexes and their brain structure. But he doesn't talk about social pressures that contribute to those choices, such as job availability, biases of hiring management, traditional gender roles, and so on. He uses test data to deduce what emotion a person is experiencing from a photograph of their eyes, taking the trends of how well males and females do compared to autistic and allistic, and then drawing conclusions. Did he ever consider the subjectivity of the test, like natural eye shape, environmental factors, state of mind, and so on? He also concludes autistics have an extreme male brain, a huge logical leap that I've talked about before. This and other logical leaps led him to ask pregnant women if they could measure levels of testosterone in their amniotic fluid to predict chances of the child developing autism. And since then, he's claimed that gender difference is the wrong way to look at it. In 2011, he published a book called The Science of Evil, where he suggests autistics treat other people as objects, comparing us to psychopaths, narcissists, and people with borderline personality disorder. Now he writes, borderline personality disorder, psychopathy, narcissism, autism, and Asperger syndrome. The people who exhibit these conditions have one thing in common: a lack of empathy. In some cases, this can lead to dangerous scenarios. Think of the Columbine High School tragedy. But in others, it can simply mean a different way of interpreting our world, like Kim Peek, who inspired the film Rain Man. So what causes an inability to empathize in the first place, and what exactly happens when we lose or never possess a desire to understand or care how other people feel? Yeah, so that book suggests autistics lack empathy, but the opposite is often the case. Many of us have extreme empathy, showing empathy for inanimate objects and imaginary characters and more. Also in 2011, he published Zero Degrees of Empathy, a new theory of human cruelty, another book where he places both autistics and psychopaths at the zero end of the empathy scale, but then differentiating us only by saying psychopaths are zero negative and autistics are zero positive. Simon wrote that people who are zero positive in empathy have autism spectrum conditions. They too show underactivity in almost every area of the empathy circuit. Simon suggests again that autistics treat other people as objects, and autistics were compared to psychopaths, narcissists, and people with borderline personality disorder. Now, he's had some growth since then. He's learned it's more a matter of struggling with cognitive empathy, which is recognizing and identifying emotions in others, but we have normal levels of affective empathy, which are the feelings of emotions for others. He does claim that psychopaths and people with antisocial disorder were the opposite, where they had strong cognitive empathy and no affective empathy. And he also wrote about the way abuse contributes to breaking down empathy. And when confronted about his controversial conclusions, he defended himself by saying the book was an exploration of different factors. In 2013, he published The Maladapted Mind, another book about psychopathy, but focusing on how it may have evolved in humans. The following year, he published Lego-Based Therapy, a book selling the idea of systemizing brains in autistics and how talking while playing with Lego can help in therapy sessions with autistics. In 2020, he published The Pattern Seekers. This is his attempt at redeeming himself in the autistic community. This book focuses on the theory that autism is more of a difference than a disability. He details how autism is prevalent in families with members in STEM occupations, expanding on his empathizing, systemizing theory and his assortative mating theory, but with the additional focus on the contributions of autistics throughout history. Cohen suggests humans are the most successful species capable of invention, emphasizing the benefits of allowing children to pursue their interests, which may be more systemizing in nature but ultimately more beneficial for human advancement. In his book, The Essential Difference About Theory of Mind, he says, a theory of mind remains one of the quintessential abilities that makes us human. By theory of mind, we mean being able to infer the full range of mental states, beliefs, desires, intentions, imagination, emotions, etc., that cause action. In brief, having a theory of mind is to be able to reflect on the contents of one's own and others' minds. Difficulty in understanding other minds is a core cognitive feature of autism spectrum conditions. In numerous other writings, Cohen asserts that both theory of mind and cognitive empathy rely upon an ability to see and to read nonverbal signals. If a person can't do so, but relies upon verbal language or another form of communication, then that person has an impairment in theory of mind and in the cognitive empathy that depends upon it, resulting in a deficit in one of the quintessential abilities that makes us human. Essentially, he implies autistics are less than human. And scientists are expected to have their work reviewed by peers. Granted, peer review does not mean peer consensus. However, it does mean theories can be peer validated, and yet several peers have been unable to replicate Cohen's findings. So sure, his ideas have been reviewed by his peers, sometimes co-authored with other peers, but many peers have provided criticisms and rebuttals to his theories. He's been criticized for his conclusions, as studies have shown, including more recent studies that he's performed, that 40% to 60% of autistics have impaired theory of mind, and 40% to 60% of autistics don't. Time magazine criticized the assortative mating theory, which falsely claims most autistic people are strong in math. He's been criticized for working disproportionately more with autistics who do not have learning disabilities or intellectual impairments, which does not serve the full autistic community. His theory of mind claims have been shown to be a two-way street, with non-autistic people struggling to have a theory of mind of autistics. And neuroscientist Gina Rippon criticized Baron-Cohen's theories, calling his book The Essential Difference neuro-trash, and his research methods as weak. Neuroscientist Lise Elliott supported Rippon's view, writing, "The hunt for male and female distinctions inside the skull is a lesson in bad research practice." Philosopher Neil Levy criticized this theory as very disappointing, with a superficial notion of intelligence, concluding that Baron-Cohen's major claims about mind blindness and systemizing empathizing are at best dubious. Time magazine journalist Judith Warner wrote that he most dramatically wandered into fraught territory in 2003 when he published the book The Essential Difference, which called autism a manifestation of an extreme male brain, one that's predominantly hardwired for understanding and building systems, as opposed to a female brain, one that's predominantly hardwired for empathy, and ended up on the wrong side of the debate on science and sex differences. Joyce Benenson criticized him in the Journal of Nature by saying, "The idea that males are more interested in systemizing than females merits serious consideration. It is unquestionably a novel and fascinating idea that seems likely to generate a rich empirical body of literature as its properties are tested. The second part of the theory, that females are more empathetic than males, is more problematic. Other measures, however, show that males are highly socially skilled." Neurologist and pediatrician Isabel Rapin and psychologist Helen Tager-Flusberg wrote in the Wall Street Journal, "Isabella Rapin finds Dr. Baron-Cohen's theory proactive, but adds that it does not account for some of the many neurological features of the disorder, like the motor symptoms, such as repetitive movements and clumsiness, the sleep problems, or the seizures. Other worries that the term extreme male brain could be misinterpreted. Males are commonly associated with qualities such as aggression," says Helen Tager-Flusberg. "What's dangerous is that's the inference people will make. Oh, these are extreme males." Other critics state that his theories are gross misinterpretations of developmental data. Psychiatrist David Skuse claimed communication differences between genders are likely to be small. Psychiatrist Meng-Chuan Lei says the study results have not been replicated. Now, the field of autism research is rapidly growing, and significant advancements have taken place since Cohen's work began, which explains some of the outdated and controversial theories documented in his older writings. For instance, in the 80s, autistic experts thought 3/4 of autistics had an intellectual impairment. But today we know it's the opposite, that 3/4 of autistics do not have an intellectual impairment. They used to believe autism was mostly a male condition, but more girls and women have since been diagnosed. The diagnostic criteria has also evolved since then, where Asperger's was only really a valid diagnosis for a 20-year period before it was absorbed into autism spectrum disorder in the DSM-5 in 2013. Genetic research has broadened our understanding of autism as well, including confirmation that vaccines do not cause autism, and scientists with any amount of ethics would change their views in light of new evidence. Cohen claims to have done that. In 2014, he and his research team discovered that 2/3 of autistics have thought about committing suicide, and half of those, so 1/3 of autistics, have attempted or planned suicide. He published this in a well-read journal, hoping to get more attention on this, but little, if anything, has been done to help at a government level. Now, Simon says that this has driven him to pivot his focus toward things that can be done to reduce the suicidality in the autistic community. And that's great. Finally, he is putting his power and energy behind something real. But then in 2021, he led the Spectrum 10K project, which was commissioned by the Wellcome Trust, who offered £3 million to research the effects of autism. Now, the Wellcome Trust was the same organization who provided fellowship to Andrew Wakefield in the 1980s. I have a video about Andrew Wakefield coming out soon. The Spectrum 10K project would have required collecting the DNA of 10,000 autistic individuals, which is why it's called Spectrum 10K. It originally focused on developing a prenatal test to diagnose autism before birth, like they do with Down syndrome. But this raised concerns in the autistic community because the test for Down syndrome comes with the option to terminate pregnancy if tests are positive. In other words, it was riding the line to eugenics. While Cohen said it was not his intention to use the data that they collected for eugenics, and he could see where concerns along those lines were coming from. But there was no guarantee that he and the project team could prevent future misuse of the information. Once collected, the data needed to be shared for verification purposes, which opens the doors for it ending up in the wrong hands and being used for nefarious purposes. Because of the publicity at the center of the project, needing thousands of autistics, for example, the project consulted with several hundred autistics who raised several concerns. Another concern was about certain members of the research team, including Dr. Daniel Geschwind, who was associated with the now dissolved organization Cure Autism Now. The Spectrum 10K project was reported to have been canceled in January 2025 because of concerns raised by the autistic community, who insisted the project needed more ethical safeguards. However, the project team stated they no longer need to collect new DNA samples, as we can use existing health and genetic databases to better understand the health challenges faced by autistic people. So despite calling it a cancellation, it's more of a shift in how they will obtain data for their research. Despite claiming to be anti-eugenics, a BBC News article about his work said this about Simon. The prospect of a prenatal test for autism, allowing couples to choose whether to have a baby with the condition, is coming closer. And with it also comes the possibility of a prenatal drug treatment being developed. But in this week's Scrubbing Up, leading autism expert Professor Simon Baron-Cohen warns caution is needed to ensure associated talents like numerical abilities are not lost if the test or a cure become available. So in recent years, he claims to have switched his focus to look at the strengths of autistics and to address social and health concerns affecting the autistic community. Cohen has admitted that there has since been a lot of study about the genetic origins of autism, which he claims have changed his views. He admits there were significant concerns of eugenics, and he still maintains that his approach with the Spectrum 10K project was not about eugenics. And yet, talks of a cure or prenatal treatment and shifting from volunteers to compiling existing data to fit his study are in complete conflict of his claim. So while he's continuously painted himself as an advocate for autistics, his bias shows he's more about solving the problem of autism. He's still peddling lies and false conclusions that contribute to stigma. And while I want to give him credit for his supposed change of heart, that's difficult to do when you consider he started Spectrum 10K after his supposed change of heart. And if he's had a change of heart, why is he still selling those old books containing misinformation? I've had a difficult time trying to decide how I feel about Simon. I think deep down he wants to help the autistic community, and I also think he wants his theories to be true. And unfortunately, he's willing to push his theories regardless of the harm it causes the autistic community. I think he thinks he's doing good by us, and maybe I don't give him enough credit for trying. But I think he's learned that his earliest approaches to autism are wrong, but he's still complicit with making money off of those ideas. I'm glad he decided to pull back on the Spectrum 10K project, but the fact that he says his thinking has changed and he still comes up with things like that afterward really make me hesitant to trust him at all. And his willingness to team up with companies like Wellcome Trust, who are known to have done harm to the autistic community up until this year, should give us all pause. I don't know. What are your thoughts? Do you think Simon Baron-Cohen is a force for good in the autistic community or not? While I don't necessarily think any one person is one-dimensionally good or evil, I'm pretty sure he's as complicated as the next guy. But when he's respected as an authority and spreads faulty, biased claims that contribute to stigma, that feels like a conflict to me. Let me know your thoughts. And until next time, thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please comment, like, and subscribe to see more content like this. Or click on the video here to continue watching.